All right. Well, let's get started. Good day, everybody. We want to welcome you to one of PrimePay's monthly broker webinars. This has been a series all throughout the year here in 2017. And due to such a busy selling season for all of you and us here in December and January, this will be our last webcast of the year. But we always make this one special. And we do have a special guest here today that I'll introduce here just momentarily. But the title for today's webinar is Critical Year-End Employer Compliance Requirements. Wow. Okay, that's a mouthful. But we've got a tremendous amount of content, but delivered from one of our experts here at PrimePay. And so I'll be introducing him in just a moment. I first off want to say thank you to many of our broker concierge partners, benefit broker partners here. You have enabled PrimePay to have a very successful 2017. And I truly hope that in this partnership that we've been able to drive success for your agency as well, because it's a partnership. And so I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank you for attending here today. We have a lot of folks on here today. And so I do want to go over a little bit of the logistics here of the webinar. So first off, due to the number of folks, we have muted everyone's lines, all right? But the content today demands that we hear from you, and so we do covet your questions. And so if you would, as we go through the content here today, if you would go into the GoToMeeting menu to the question box, go ahead and type in your question if you would, and you can do that at any time throughout the presentation. At the end of the presentation, or at the end of our special guest speaker's presentation, we will then take those questions and we will do our best to handle those at that time. Now, there could be a lot of very specific questions to specific situations with your clients. We may need to address some of those offline, and we are happy to do so, okay? But if there are many general questions, we're going to try to tackle as many as we can in the hour that you've given us, okay? So please go ahead and type in your question. Now, the top question that I get each and every month is, are you recording it, and can we get a copy of the slide deck? All right. The answer is yes, we always record it, and we generally post the recordings to our public broker concierge YouTube channel, usually within 2 days after the webinar. Now, if you go onto that channel and subscribe to it, you actually will get a little email notification saying, "Ooh, you know, a new webinar has been posted." Okay, so that's a little secret there that you can get that information as soon as we post it. But please go there. You can view the recording. Now, we only provide, as an exclusive feature of our Broker Concierge Partner Program, our Broker Concierge partners will receive a copy of the slide deck, and we post that into your broker portal shortly after the webinar here today. So we will have that for you. At the end of this webinar, I will provide some follow-up kind of year-end cleanup types of discussions here with you as we follow up to this webinar. So I'll share a little more in detail with you here in a little while. So we do, as always, try to provide great content, whether it's sales strategies, whether it, in this case, it's regulatory or technical guidance. At the end of the day, we want to be able to deliver this in a practical way that you can go right after this webinar and be able to communicate with your clients and drive specific help to those specific business challenges and compliance issues that they are facing. And so to bring this into practical light, I do want to introduce our speaker here today. So Mitch Geiger, as many of you may know, he is the Vice President of Regulatory Compliance here at PrimePay. In this role, Mitch advises on many complex issues, so surrounding ACA compliance. There's been a plethora of information there, right? But also the administration of employee benefit plans and health and welfare benefit plans. He's an ERISA attorney, and it's great to have have that level of expertise here. He has provided so much insight, certainly into the day-to-day compliance issues that our clients are facing as it relates to compliance. And he leads our regulatory compliance team here at PrimePay. But many of you may not know, before coming to PrimePay, Mitch began his diverse career in government as an investigator for the Department of Labor. He served several years on the legal compliance team for Northern Trust Retirement Services, and later worked as an in-house counsel for one of the largest insurance brokerage firms in the country. Now, here's a little tidbit, something you may not know. When Mitch isn't busy consulting clients, which he does quite often, you can catch him crafting his next work of art. His pieces have been displayed in shows at Tyler School of Art here in Philadelphia, the Alexandria Art League, and the Torpedo Factory in Arlington, Virginia. All right, so do check out some of those pieces. That is fantastic. So before we also get started, and I turn this over to Mitch, I do want to at least provide the disclaimers here today. This presentation is not meant at all to be an exhaustive overview of all the rules and requirements to which health and welfare plans are certainly subject. The guidance here is designed only to give general information on the issues actually covered, and it's not intended to be a comprehensive summary of all laws. And so we do ask, as always, that you consult, but certainly your clients consult your own legal advisor regarding specific application of the information to your own plans or to your clients' plans. So with that, Mitch, I am excited to have you here today and look forward to the content that you're going to provide. So Mitch, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thanks. So as Steve mentioned, I am a former DOL investigator. So just to set the bar appropriately, this may be marginally more entertaining than an IRS audit, but maybe not as entertaining as, say, dinner with Vlad the Impaler. So it was somewhere in between. So the topics that we're going to cover today, there's a number of things that have come up recently just in the last few weeks. Specifically, the executive order that got signed on October 12th. I have gotten a lot of inquiries regarding that. And so I'm going to spend a fairly large amount of time going through that, because that, as well as the implications of that order, could certainly easily dictate 2019 and beyond. But we will address the near-term effects of that order and some of the reactions from the agencies. After that, I'm going to discuss some of the ACA reporting, which still in effect for those of you who are holding the forms 1094 and 1095 near and dear to your heart. That is still active and coming up soon. The SBC deadline and other ERISA requirements. I'll also be talking very, very briefly about the non-discrimination testing requirements. So to get started, the elephant in the room, the executive order. So on October 12th, 2017, President Trump directed various federal agencies to take very specific regulatory actions that will, quote unquote, increase healthcare choices for millions of Americans. So along with the EEO, the administration also issued a press release, and that provided a lot of insight into what the agencies are directed to review and where they may be heading. That's what I'm going to be focusing on for the first, say, 20 minutes conservatively of the presentation. So what does the EEO do and what does it not do? The order does not make any immediate changes to the rules implementing the ACA. I'm actually reading that straight from the slide because I think that's really important to keep in mind. There's no immediate changes. Everything is status quo. So all of that look-back measurement methodology, all of those required offers of affordable and minimum value coverage, all still in play. Summary of benefits and coverage requirements, still in play. All of the mandates regarding the small and individual markets as well as the large employer markets, all still in play. So the EO really just laid out some policy objectives, excuse me. And so that's what we're going to be doing. So really what's going on is how does it affect employer-sponsored plans? So those objectives, it's expansion of association health plans, and I'll talk about that. Expansion of the use of short-term limited duration insurance, or STLDI, and expansion of HRAs. So that's really what the primary goals of the EO is. And just to give you a little more context, so as far as the guidance that it's being given towards the agencies, within the next 60 days, or about 45 days now, we're going to be getting some proposed regs from the DOL, from Treasury, from HHS. And that's going to specifically address AHPs to start. Secondly, they'll be providing some guidance on the STLDI, also within 60 days. And then further down the road, there's supposed to be more substantive requirements with HRAs. That's about 120 days. They have to consider additional changes. But I'm going to address that HRA in the near term, in the next few slides, actually. So since I'd originally put together this presentation, there have been some changes. And so this section 4 of the EO, so in order to comply with the rules, the HRAs, they are considered group health plans. They're still subject to the market reforms. And in order to comply, they have to follow certain integration requirements, right? Those are still in play. And the group health coverage requirements that they are subject to, those are those annual and lifetime limits. And the only way around that is to integrate with a group health plan, a compliant group health plan. And as we know, individual market coverage, either in or outside of the exchange, is not considered group health coverage. So you cannot integrate HRAs with group health coverage, right? So, or I am really off today, so I apologize. The HRAs can't be integrated with individual market coverage because the individual market coverage is not considered group health coverage. So where does that leave us? So the EO really says they want us to expand the use of HRAs, right? So there's a couple of options the various departments may have, right? So they can craft some new limited scope accepted benefits that HRAs would be able to be used for. There was a pilot program last year on wraparound accepted benefits that could be offered through the end of December 2018. There were a few other accepted benefits that they could create. They could exercise their authority to craft some new ones. There's another opportunity. There's a statutory exemption that was created under the 21st Century Cures Act this past December. That's that QSE HRA, the Qualified Small Employer HRAs. So as of last night, we now know that the departments were considering the expansion of QSE HRAs. They published a 60-page, 78-part Q&A specifically regarding QSE HRAs. I've gone through part of it, and I'm going to address a little bit of that here because, again, I've been getting a lot of questions about QSE HRAs. So for years beginning after 2016, they changed these rules. And after December of 2016, this new type of HRA was created specifically for small employers, that is non-ALEs, under 50 or more full-time employees. And these statutory exemptions, this QSE HRA, was not considered a group health plan under the tax code, wasn't considered a group health plan under ERISA, under the Public Health Services Act, or a number of other provisions. So these QSE HRAs are actually not subject to any of those mandates or healthcare reform provisions that are applicable to group health plans. The exception to that, so they are subject to the high tax, the HIT tax, the tax on high cost health coverage. They're also not subject to COBRA because they weren't subject to the tax code. So they're not subject to the SBC requirements, none of that, but the ERISA general compliance requirements, that is those disclosure, the plan document, the reporting, the SPD, those are in play for QSE HRAs. Also, non-discrimination testing requirements are applicable, so 105H does apply in this context, and that will come into play as I discuss this further down the line in the next couple of slides. So there's a lot of small employers are going to be attracted to QSE HRAs. I know that we've been getting these questions. There are some limitations. So employers can't maintain another group health plan and simultaneously sponsor a QSE HRA. The QSE HRAs can only be funded through direct employer contributions. That is, there's no employee salary reductions allowed. And again, the non-discrimination rules apply. And so there can be some issues when you're in a market where the population starts to get, say, age banding requirements, and you're reimbursing these individual plans, and younger population might be reimbursed smaller, lesser amounts than, say, senior or older staff. That could potentially cause some NDT issues. But again, we're still waiting to hear some more guidance on that. On its face, it's not deemed discriminatory if you limit reimbursements to age banding. But again, you have to be sensitive to the NDT requirements. So anyway, what's new in the 2017-67 notice, which is very exciting, on QSE HRAs? So there's a lot of things that the notice provides. I'm not going to go into depth on it. Again, it was 78 or 79 Q&As. The most interesting thing is who you can exclude from an HRA that's a qualified small employer status. So as far as part-time employees, I think post-ACA, most people automatically think of 30 hours or more per week. That is not the case with QSE HRAs. So if you have a stable population, that is a large number of your employees, or at least some, work a full 40 hours per week, and similarly situated or similar workers in those positions regularly work less than 35 hours a week, you could exclude those individuals as part-time. Also seasonal, the same sort of rationale. If you have a staff that regularly works all 12 months of the year, you can exclude those whose customarily work annually less than 9 months. That's much different than the standard ACA requirements. But notwithstanding all of those requirements, you can always exclude people working less than 25 hours a week or less than 7 months out of the year. Again, it's a pretty big departure from the ACA requirements. But again, this is for non-ALEs, so it has to be less than 50 full-time employees or equivalents. So AHPs, so you're going to have to hang with me. I'll try to get through this as quickly as possible, but this is a fairly complex issue, and this could have very significant consequences to brokers and the insurance market generally. And so I want to try to get this conceptually out there, and hopefully it will get conveyed. So the DOL is directed to consider expansion of the AHP commonality of interest requirements. So what is all of that? So there's an AHP, or an association health plan, is generally this group of individuals or these small businesses. They pool together to purchase health coverage for their employees. Now, an AHP coverage or an association coverage, it's not a distinct category of health insurance under the ACA. It's not specified under ERISA or the code or even the Public Health Service Act. So the ACA does not specify whether AHP coverage should be treated as individual, small group, or large group market or as health plans. So what does that mean? So the group health plan, it has to be sponsored by an employer, and it has to be an employer welfare benefit plan under ERISA. And so what we're looking at here is it's important for it to be an employer plan under ERISA because ERISA can be exempt from state regulation, right? So what happens? So if you have a self-insured employee welfare benefit plan, it's protected from state regulation, okay? However, simultaneously, AHPs could be deemed or are deemed multiple employer welfare arrangements or MIWAs. And under those definitions, those arrangements are providing benefits to employees of two or more unrelated employers, right? The AHPs as a MIWA, just by definition, the DOL has deemed that they are subject to both ERISA and state law. So it's fairly complex to establish and run a MIWA. Now, where are we with all this? So if the AHP is deemed to be a bona fide group or an association, then they could be treated for certain purposes as a single employer welfare benefit plan. Okay, now, once we get to that point, here's what happens. The AHPs, generally, they have to have something in common other than just providing health coverage. Now, if the DOL loosens up all of those requirements, then here's what's going to happen. There's going to be these AHPs. They can grab a group of small employers subject to the really heavily mandated individual and small marketplace, and they are treated in the group marketplace, the large group marketplace, the over 50. What does that mean? So in the individual and small market, they're subject to all of the EHB requirements. They're subject to the rules limiting factors that can be considered in setting the premiums. There's a huge laundry list. Now, compare that to the large group market. Yes, the large group market still has a huge number of reforms that they're subject to, but large group market has a lot more flexibility in what EHBs they cover. There's a lot more flexibility in benefit design. There's a little more leverage in pricing. And so that becomes a really big distinction. Now, the only difference is the minimum value that is in ACA land. The minimum value is determined based on coverage of certain essential health benefits, those EHBs. But here's the rub. If all of the participating members in that AHP are small employers and not subject to the ACA, then they can offer coverage that's not as onerous as the individual and small market, doesn't have that first dollar coverage of all 10 EHB categories. So it's going to be cheaper, and they don't have to worry about anything except in the context of the large group market reforms. Okay, so hopefully you're all following me so far. So what we're doing is the DOL is being asked to consider these AHPs as a bona fide group, and for purposes of getting group insurance, a single employer, and then the MIWA status, you pull all of these unrelated employers together, and traditionally, those MIWAs would be subject to state law, which in many states, it's impossible at this point to establish new MIWAs. But if it becomes a self-funded AHP, then the DOL could turn around and set up or establish ERISA preemption for self-funded AHPs. And so these small association health plans, if they become self-funded, will not be subject to state law. They would be exclusively in the purview of DOL. ERISA preemption applies, and they would be operating outside of any state insurance oversight. So that's sort of a lot to digest all at once, but hopefully that is coming across. Keep going. This is the first part of the EO. So, oh, I think this is, I jumped ahead of myself. So this is a nice catch up on what I've already talked about. So STLDIs, that's the next part of the EO. So short-term, limited duration health insurance, right? So this exclusion, it exempts STLDIs from a lot of the consumer protections. It's like skinny coverage, right? So you don't have the guaranteed issue, you don't have the guaranteed renewal rules, there's no prohibition on annual or lifetime limits. There's not even rules on pre-existing condition exclusions. This is true skinny coverage, and it was originally intended to be used for somebody that just lost coverage, they missed the exchange enrollment, they wanted to get some coverage, and so they decide to get this STLDI. And before 2016, the PHSA defined this STLDI really as 12 months or less would be the policy. And really what happened was the HHS was looking at what the gap in coverage rules were and the individual mandate, and they decided to change it effective the January 1st of this year. They changed that to limit it to 3 months or less, because in the world of ACA with guaranteed issue and all of the protections, the 3-month gap is the maximum that an individual can go without triggering the individual penalty, right? So they decided to lessen it down to 3 months, including renewals and all of this other stuff. So the final rule that limited this coverage to less than 3 months, it aligned it with that short coverage gap exemption. And so what can the departments do now that the executive order has said, we want to expand the use of STLDIs in the marketplace for individuals to be able to obtain health coverage? Well, I mean, the obvious implications is to expand it back out to 12 months. That's a pretty easy one, right? And the follow-up to that would be to deem STLDI as minimum essential coverage, because one of the specific problems with using STLDI is that it is not deemed sufficient to get you out of the individual mandate. It's not sufficient coverage. So that could be, in the short term, problematic. If they revisit it and define STLDIs as minimum essential coverage, then that would be great for individuals that are trying to get skinny plans or low cost plans. But we'll have to wait and see on how all of this plays out. Now, again, the order doesn't make any immediate changes to the rules, so I'm going to keep harping on that. But these objectives that are coming out, there's a lot of implications and employer action. So let's take a quick breath, and I'll just revamp. This is the last slide on the EO, I promise, and then I'll move on to the next action by the current administration. But depending on how the HRAs are drafted, large and small employers may be able to redesign their benefit plans to provide employees with access to purchase coverage in the individual market. They could allow employers to satisfy mandates through different types of DC arrangements that we haven't quite seen, but are on the near horizon. As far as AHPs, there's some ramifications that could come into play. That is, if if the association health plans begin to address cheap coverage, then what might happen is they're likely to concentrate only on the quality of their risk pool because they are not subject to guaranteed issue requirements. And so the healthier, younger populations may gravitate towards the AHPs, and then ultimately leaving people in the exchange as a high-risk pool that would spike premiums there, that also might spike premiums elsewhere, indirectly impacting employers. And similarly with the use of STLDIs, if that is expanded and individuals eligible for other coverage start sliding into that coverage population, that would also create a higher risk pool in the exchanges and similarly start to spike premiums. So that was a lot, so I apologize. But I know I wanted to at least have that vaguely covered. There's a lot of conceptual stuff that I tried to cut out, and I don't know if it came across efficiently, but I'm doing my best. So again, better than a tax audit, less entertaining than Vlad the Impaler. So CSRs, also on October 12th, the White House announced that it would end the cost sharing reduction payments, or CSR payments, immediately. It was effective immediately. The ACA requires insurers to offer plans with a reduced patient cost to populations enrollees with incomes of 100 to 250% of FPL. And that reduced cost sharing, it's only available in the silver level plans, and the premiums are same standard as those. But the bottom line is about 7 million people are currently receiving or were receiving CSR payments. Now, to compensate for that added cost, under the ACA, insurers are required to have a reduced cost sharing, and the federal government makes payments directly to the insurance companies to offset that. So under the ACA, it's approved, it's authorized, but not appropriated. So I'm not going to go into the long drawn out history that will make this section much shorter, but effectively what was going on was, because Congress did not appropriate those payments, which by the way, for 2017 is roughly $7 billion. Those payments were not appropriated in the budgetary process. And so the prior administration took the unprecedented step of just going ahead and making the payments because he deemed that it was authorized, except just not appropriated. That triggered several lawsuits. They're still in play. And the CSR still remains in flux. And over in Congress, Lamar Alexander, the Republican gentleman from Tennessee, was co-working with Patty Murray, the Democrat from Washington, and they were trying to develop some bipartisan market stabilization legislation. And so right now, all of this is in flux. I think that just objectively, I think that this was supposed to put some pressure on Congress in order to make them step up and help them figure things out. But because of some other commentary that have been going on, I'm not entirely certain at this point. So I think everything is sort of up in the air. So what are the implications for employers for all this? So I guess this is what you guys really want to know to tell clients. So the direct implication for employers is really not all that much. That is, since the prerequisite for an individual to obtain the CSR subsidies is to qualify for a premium reduction tax credit, there shouldn't be any change to an ALE's A or B penalty exposure, because this CSR reduction and the executive order itself does not touch anything with regards to the premium reduction subsidies. They were not impacted at all by this, right? So since the ALEs have to make an offer of affordable or minimum value coverage in order to avoid the A or B penalties, I would not predict a significant increase in employees suddenly leaving the marketplace and enrolling in employer-sponsored plans, since those individuals would be ineligible for the marketplace subsidies if the employers offering valid, affordable MV coverage, right? Now, if carriers exit the marketplace or they cancel their plans in light of the policy change, there may be a small increase in requests for special enrollments. But remember, this is the population that's earning between 100 and 250% of FPL, so it would be a very specific population, and they might not have the cash or wherewithal to enroll in group health plan. That was the whole point of them being in the exchange to begin with. So we'll see how that goes. Now, indirect implications, still less clear. You know, I mentioned at breakneck speed about the high risk pool and how if these people drop individual insurance coverage, it might be more expensive in the marketplace. That might lead to carriers dropping out of the marketplace, or if they remain, there might be price spikes. But regardless, the indirect results, when there's an increase in an uninsured population, all the payers in the healthcare system are going to be pinched. And that's going to be affected through higher costs when there's a high uninsured population receiving uncompensated care. So I will now put the brakes on that portion of the presentation, my wonk background, in case any of you are familiar with that. So let's go to the ACA. Now, the administration, for those of you who don't know, they've already published the its intent to enforce the employer mandate for next year. So the ACA reporting, that's the forms 1094 and 1095B and C, they are still due. The IRS recently published a notice saying that they will not accept silent returns anymore. So employees will be expecting to get those documents. You need to have your clients get these processed in a timely way. I don't expect to see any delays as we have in the past few years. So that's issue number one. Issue number two, they've also already published earlier this year, I think it was May, they published the affordability calculation. It's down from last year at 9.56%. So those of you that use the safe harbor and you do that calculation in your head, if you utilize the 2017 single FPL, you multiply it by that percentage, that's $96.07 for a monthly premium contribution for that affordability safe harbor under the FPL. There's also, they've also published some others. That is, you know, the amounts required to be paid towards the cost of an exchange, that's dropped. So it's 2.01 to 9.56%, and that varies across household income bands. Okay, so keep going. So individual shared responsibility. Again, the silent returns are dead. The legislative provisions of the ACA, this is from the EO, they're still in force until changed by Congress. Taxpayers remain obligated to follow the law and what they may owe. So a lot of this language that they've started using, both from Treasury, from the White House, that's sort of, if you're reading the tea leaves, it sounds like this might be the first year they start calculating penalties, both into the individual shared responsibilities as well as potentially in the large employer market. For the ALEs themselves, I apologize. So again, they're not accepting silent returns. They've expressed their intent to enforce these provisions. So now is the time to make sure that everything is in place with respect to the 6055 and 6056 provisions, as well as any potential liability exposure under the 4980H A and B penalties. So finally to the deadline. So we're finally up to the title of the presentation, which is the issues relating to end of year calendar compliance. So we really need to make sure we're focused on some of these deadlines. 1094 and 1095, no surprises. There's pretty significant penalties that are still out there. They were bumped up this past year. I'll let you read those numbers. They're fairly significant. The SBC, so again, because the ACA requirements are still in play, the summary of benefits and coverage deadline is fast approaching. It has to be no later than 30 days prior, so that would be the very beginning of December for a calendar year plan. So that's something to keep in mind as open enrollment season has started. Next section, ERISA, my favorite. So, start with the beginning. Pretty standard. Every welfare benefit plan has to be has to be established and maintained pursuant to a written instrument. What does that mean? You have to have a plan document. The plan document has really pretty significant requirements, and those requirements go beyond what will exist in a standard carrier contract. In fact, if you utilize just an employer, just an insurance carrier contract, what will happen is the courts and the Department of Labor deem that to be the plan document. It's just an insufficient one. And one of those little quirks of ERISA is if you don't reserve the right to terminate the plan in the plan document, you're not allowed to. So if you just had an insurance carrier contract in place as your plan document, you're now stuck with that until you update it, amend it, and then terminate it. There's a lot of other provisions that exist that are extremely inconvenient for a plan sponsor if they do sponsor employee benefits. That is things like preferential treatment and review in the case of a trial. There's also provisions that have some protections for subrogation, a whole bunch of things that really insurance carrier contracts are just not going to cover, okay? Now, as I mentioned, there's no specific penalties for a failure, but if you want to avoid some of those challenges that exist if it's just an insurance contract, that's you end up with a de novo review. That is, you don't get the luxury of having the interpretation of the plan with respect to the most deferential review. That will happen. There's also criminal penalties if you don't have a plan document in place. So again, you have the less favorable standard of review. You have a limited ability to amend or terminate. There's also difficulty enforcing plan provisions. There's some very basic appeals rights that you might not be able to handle with respect to just basic rules like an eligibility determination if you do not have a formal plan document. And finally, here's a handful. It's sort of a grab bag. There's a lot of other notices that the deadline is the end of this year. It would be December 29th this year. WICRA notice, that's by December 29th. CHRA, similarly. Now, the EEOC wellness notice is a little more complex. If you do have a wellness program, there's certain HIPAA and ACA non-discrimination provisions that pop into place. There's some pretty significant penalties. So the maximum civil penalties, generally 100 for each individual affected. There's a couple of disclosures. You can avoid that if it's not a willful violation, but I also have the penalties for uncorrected errors up there. So if it's a first offense, it's going to be a $2,500 penalty. And then if it's beyond a de minimis, it kicks up actually to $15K. So that becomes pretty significant pretty quickly. Form 5500. So in addition to the disclosure requirements under ERISA, you also have reporting obligations. So primary reporting obligation, many of you are probably familiar, Form 5500. That's the annual report requirement. There is an exemption for small, unfunded, fully insured, or a combination. Now, there was a proposal that had been floated. They have not published regulations yet, but for effective with the 2019 plan year filings, they would eliminate that small, unfunded, and fully insured exemption gone completely. There would be a full new schedule that requires disclosure of compliance with a whole slew of ACA and Public Health Service Act requirements. A lot of it would be yes or no questions. So are you compliant with the pre-existing condition prohibition? Are you compliant with the disclosure of SBCs, that sort of thing? I am not sure where the status of that lies at the current time, but that is still currently the intent of the Department of Labor. Now, timeline. So they're usually due 7th month after the close of the plan year. So for calendar year plans, that's going to be July 31st. That date has come and gone. Hopefully, if your plan is subject to the reporting requirements, you have already submitted. There is an automatic extension if you file a 5558. That generally means for a calendar plan year that your 5500 would be due October 15th. If that's the case, your summary annual report or your SAR would be due by December 15th of this year. So that's something to keep in mind. If you have not filed yet and your clients are subject to the filing requirement, that is, they had over 100 participants as of the beginning of the plan year, then you might need to reach out and have a delinquent filing submitted on your behalf. And then immediately following that, you will have to get an SAR out. Non-discrimination testing. So generally speaking, it's a very, very high level, but the tax code really does not like to have benefit plans discriminate in favor of certain officers, highly compensated individuals and participants, certain key employees. There's 3 general classes of tests. There's eligibility, contributions, or benefits. The tests vary depending on the type of benefit, but generally speaking, if you run it through a cafeteria plan, what is going to apply is Code Section 125. If it is a dependent care account, 129 will apply. And if it's a self-insured plan, such as an HRA, Section 105 applies. And if it's a flexible spending account, you get both 125 and 105. Now, if there's a problem discovered after the end of the plan year, you're not able to make adjustments. So in order for that to be an efficient resolution, or if you're able to address the problem during the plan year, you have to test mid-year, or at least several months before the end of the current plan year. So that way you're able to adjust withholdings of the highly compensated participants down in order to make sure the plan tests pass as of the last day of the plan year. So that means that October and November is really starting to push the limit of when you should be doing this testing. Because if you wait until after the end of the plan year, what will happen is you have to do an amended W-2 for each of the impacted highly compensated individuals, and you will simultaneously have to do amended quarterly 940s for each affected quarterly return. So you lose the tax advantage for the highly compensated individuals that are participating, and the employer also loses the tax advantage for FICA and FUTA with respect to all of those benefits that they were paying through the 125 plan. So that was sort of a breakneck speed, but I'm just at about 50 minutes. And so we have a couple of minutes left for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mitch. Wow, yeah, just a ton.
That was a lot. I was a fire hose.
It's all good. It's all good. Really appreciate your comments here today because, You know, there's some of this is a little opinion because, you know, we have things that are not yet into law. And as you mentioned with the executive order, listen, Congress still wants to do a lot with what was discussed in that EO. There was a couple questions. I do see a lot of questions, and I do want to remind everyone, at least during this time, if you have a specific question on the content here today, go ahead and go into the GoToMeeting question box, type in your question, okay? And we'll try to tackle that here. But one question that came up, Mitch, regarding the Form 5500 changes that may take effect in 2019, have the comments been released? If so, are you able to comment on any of those at this time?
I have not seen anything in the regulations. They haven't published anything formal yet. They've expressed an intent, but I have not seen anything. So obviously the January 2017 EO is pretty specific in making sure that agencies don't take any action to unduly burden employers when they're trying to comply with the ACA and ERISA and other employee benefit related laws. So it's not clear if they're going to roll that back. There is a new DOL EBSA Assistant Secretary nominee who would probably be much more friendly towards employers and may not have them ultimately roll out that schedule. That's in direct conflict with the mandate of the agency, which is to collect information. And these schedules have not been updated for decades. And so everyone sort of felt like they were a little overdue, but there's nothing specific giving us a timeline of when they would get rolled out. If they don't get rolled out soon, I suspect they would have to delay it because there has to be a comment period, right? Formal adoption, notice of proposed rulemaking. So if it doesn't come out soon, I wouldn't hold my breath for it. Just like the non-discrimination rules with respect to fully insured plans that were supposed to be substantially similar to the 105 self-insured discrimination testing requirements.
Very good. Thank you, Mitch. Another question that had come up, and I don't know, we may need to follow up with you afterwards here, but the attendee had asked, you know, it's my understanding that for the 2017 filing, and I'm assuming here it's the ACA filing, which is due in January, that the penalty was increased to $260 per filing. Is this correct or incorrect? I don't know if you have that specific number. You know, I know they will do some cost of living adjustments there from year to year.
I think that's right. I can't say declaratively, but that sounds right. There was an increase that was published earlier this year. That's applicable to all reporting failures under the IRS.
Good. Okay. And I tell you what, we could provide as follow-up some information there just to drive some additional clarity there. We have another question, a good one. So this is about ERISA or compliance notices. What is the EEOC wellness notice and when is it applicable?
So the EEOC wellness notice has to do with any wellness program under which the Americans with Disabilities Act rules comes into play. So this would need to get fleshed out a bit. You could actually have a whole presentation just on this, but the short version is if you have a wellness plan and it makes any inquiry that has to do with a disability or any sort of health risk assessment that includes a biometric screening, that could explicitly include any genetic information, then the EEOC guidance will kick in. The EEOC has a very specific set of disclosures that has to do with an individual being aware of their rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act and how that interplays with a wellness plan, and that they are not otherwise required to disclose genetic information, answer any disability-related inquiries, and that they cannot be denied coverage. That is, you can't have it as a threshold question for participation. So that's sort of the very, very high level overview of when that would apply. And at that point, you would have to disclose it in advance of participation in the wellness plan and at least annually thereafter.
Oh, thank you, Mitch. She actually did have a follow-up to that question then as well. Is there a model notice for this wellness notice?
There is. There is a regulatory safe harbor.
Okay. Fantastic. As I'm looking through the other questions here, Mitch, there are a lot of maybe specific questions that are related to really specific client situations that could probably be better addressed maybe directly here after the webinar. So I really appreciate it. Guys and gals, attendees, you can continue to type in your question. And so if we're unable to answer it here during the webcast here today, we will follow up with you directly then with a response. So Mitch Geiger, thank you so much for providing us with this content. Listen, it's needed information. Clients that are, really struggling through just the amount of content and information that's coming, out of Washington and out of many other locations, it's tough to keep up. And I know a lot of our benefit broker partners, they are often asked, to be the compliance officer, and it's just tough to know everything. And so we really do appreciate it. You had a lot to cover, but you did it, I think, very clearly so that we can understand it. So thank you, Mitch, for today's content. So last things, guys, if you just want to give me just a couple minutes here, I'll wrap up here on some of the things and follow up to our webinar here today. A lot of what Mitch has discussed is all around regulatory compliance, right? And as I just said, you guys come to and expect, hopefully from PrimePay, to get correct answers, but also practical answers to a lot of the challenges that your clients are facing. And, PrimePay is committed to compliance. And I just want to reiterate through our HR advisory solution that this solution has impacted thousands of our clients. And today, actually, earlier this summer, we ended up saying, you know what? If you're going to be a PrimePay client of ours, we're going to provide you for free a base version of the HR advisory service. And so that is free for every client here at PrimePay. But I'd be remiss to not share, really, for $25 a month, our HR Advisory Advanced solution can provide much of the detail to what was discussed even here today, but it even provides so much more. It provides the not just web content, HR alerts, it provides a lot of tools and guides, even employee handbook builders for the federal and state requirements. There are over 200 employee training courses or LMS courses that they have the ability to implement. And also, more than anything, your clients can have access to certified SPHR professionals that they can chat with online or certainly on the phone. And they're not only going to get verbal response, but also a written response to their very probably complex issue, right? So I also want to just share with you our year-end sales promotion has kicked off here for November 1 business, for new business here at PrimePay. And so as you can see there, we are waiving the setup fees for the solutions that are listed. If a client during the months of November through January, so this is a 3-month year-end promotion that can affect and can help you increase revenue there for your agency. And so for any new business established during November 1st through the end of January, setup fees are waived. There can be an additional $100 invoice credit for those clients who purchase even 2 or more services during this promotional period. And we're also offering a 2-year rate guarantee. And for the first time, we are then offering an exclusive incentive here for our broker concierge partners, so that if you do sell that new piece of business between November 1st and through the end of January, with a minimum of 3 closed referrals during that promotional period, each Broker Concierge Partner can earn an additional $100. That's in an e-gift card for each closed referral. And our top 3 referring partners can earn $500. Okay? Huge. This is paid not just to the agency. This is paid to you. Okay? You directly as the broker. And so if you're unsure of, well, Broker Concierge, what do I have to do to sign up? I'll give you the contact information, but we want you to reach out to our Broker Success Specialist where they can share in greater detail how Broker Concierge can truly assist your agency through this crazy busy selling season. I also want to make our announcement, at least official here on this webinar, that we now have a partnership and integration through Employee Navigator, and we've established some special pricing for you. So let me touch on this. Cobra, our integration with our Cobra services, many of you are working with technology platforms, and Employee Navigator is one of those platforms. And so we will now be introducing now and into the very near future some additional integrations that will occur directly with Employee Navigator. And the first one that was to be integrated was Cobra. And we are taking live Cobra clients today. That was effective as of October 1st, where we've integrated Cobra. Our cafeteria plans, pre-tax benefit accounts, FSA, HRA, HSA, the integration will be effective as of December 1st. So you're going to want to get with our local account executives, our regional advisors, to start looking at specific clients who can get integrated through Employee Navigator with those services. And we're also integrating our payroll services solution directly with Employee Navigator. But that is coming soon. We are currently working on that integration, and we will be providing some information very soon as to when that will be complete. And as always, as I just talked about, exclusivity within our Broker Concierge program, we want you to be a partner here with us at PrimePay, and you can do so through our that's devoted and dedicated to our benefit broker partners, and that's our Broker Concierge Partner Program, and you can join at any time. All right. So we want to thank you, actually, for attending today. Great information. You have our contact information here for our Broker Concierge team. You can reach them by phone, by email, by Twitter, LinkedIn, a lot of ways to reach us. We're going to be also providing a lot of follow-up for you here, okay, after the call here today. So look for a follow-up email to occur roughly around Friday of this week. We are going to provide the link of the recording to everyone. If you are a BC Broker Concierge exclusive partner, we're going to provide the and that will be actually posted into the broker portal, so you can view that at your leisure. There will also be a couple additional follow-ups about our sales promotion, about our connection with Employee Navigator that I think will be very important to each of you. Also, don't forget, we've got a lot of upcoming client webinars. These are client education focused webinars. Our next one actually is coming up tomorrow afternoon, and it's going to be on 401k and fiduciary rules and how those rules impact your small business. And then on November 14th, we are going to bring to life HRAs, health reimbursement arrangements, and talk about their impact and their design issues, how it impacts the small business. You can find these events on our primepay.com website under press releases, and you can actually, the registration links are there, and you can sign up at your leisure. With that, since this is our last monthly broker webinar for the year, I want to thank you so much for the business and trust that you have put with PrimePay in 2017. That's meaningful, and we want and hopefully will continue to reflect to take that trust and show through integrity and through our comprehensive suite of solutions that we drive real results for your clients. We solve major business issues with your clients, but even more importantly, right, we want to drive success for you and your agency. So with that, thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to following up with some of you with some several questions that you have, but that will conclude our webinar. Have a great day.